Hey everyone, how's it going? Dylan Tracy, aka Gang of Hippies here, and today I've got a special video for you guys. Today we're going to be going through a crash course of Ravnica Allegiance and try to get you ready for your pre-releases this weekend. As of right now, RNA is up on Arena and you can do sealed tournaments there. Starting tomorrow, the Friday the 18th, traditional draft will be up on Arena as well, and when you head out to your paper pre-releases, you'll get a code for a free draft for Arena. So that's pretty sweet. Today we're a little more geared towards specifically preparing you for your pre-release. I decided not to do a full limited set review this time since there are plenty of other resources out there to get you that information. So I just wanted to give you some quick hits to know before heading to the pre-release. First of all, if you didn't attend Guilds of Ravnica, you may be unaware that each player chooses a specific guild kit at their paper events. Inside will be 5 packs of Ravnica Allegiance and 1 seeded pack for your chosen guild, as well as 1 seeded promo card. So you will get 1 pack guaranteed to be cards just specifically for your guild. This won't happen on Arena. So in Arena you will just get randomized pools, but at your guild or at your pre-release, you will actually get to choose which guild kit you would like to use. So, I didn't see any guild that looked glaringly worse than the others for this sealed format, so I would pick the guild that most suits your playstyle and have fun with it. I will say I took limited resources grades for the guild specific commons and uncommons and took the average to give each guild a grade, and all of them were averaging about C+, with Gruul the best at B-. So take that with a grain of salt, but I would say Gruul seems pretty powerful and sealed. So with that, let's touch on each of the mechanics associated with the guilds briefly, starting with Azorius. So Azorius' mechanic is called Addendum, and it only appears on non-creature spells able to be played at instant speed. So in other words, it appears only on some instants and then on it 1 flash enchantment. Addendum gives you a bonus for casting the spell during your main phase. So for instance, Sphinx's Insight allows you to draw 2 cards, but if cast during your main phase, you also gain 2 life. It's a weird mechanic, and I don't really know if I like it, but it is interesting. I don't like that it makes you play in a certain way, but it does have a payoff in Dovin's Acuity. This is being called Information Campaign by some. Definitely not Disinformation Campaign, though. That was a little bit more powerful, but Dovin's Acuity is an enchantment. Enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and draw a card. Whenever you cast an instant spell during your main phase, you may return Dovin's Acuity to your hand. So this gives you extra incentive to cast your spells with Addendum. So you play Sphinx's Insight, draw 2 cards, gain 2 life. Then you get to also return Dovin's Acuity back to your hand to cast again to draw another card and gain 2 more life. So that's kind of what's happening there. For Orzhov, their mechanic is called Afterlife. So Afterlife appears on creatures and will be followed by a number such as Afterlife 1, seen here on Syndicate Messenger. The numbers range from 1 to 3. So this knight here, Knight of the Last Breath, he has Afterlife 3. This is the only creature with Afterlife 3. Most of them are going to be Afterlife 1 and 2. So this plays really well with all these sacrifice themes that we see in Mardu and graveyard recursion as well in Mardu. And Orzhov is pretty much just going to be about nickel and diming your opponent to death. It's probably the grindiest guild of the format, so if that's the style that you like to play, I recommend playing some Orzhov. Next up we have Rakdos, heading to the carnival. So the Rakdos mechanic is called Spectacle. It creates an alternative casting cost for spells if your opponent has taken damage this turn, or actually lost life this turn. So sometimes this makes the spells cost less to cast, like Skewer the Critics here. Other times, the Spectacle cost gives you a special effect that wouldn't have happened otherwise, like with Rick's Mighty Reveler here. So for instance, normally it costs 2, and enters the battlefield, you can loot, or if you enable Spectacle, you can cast it for 4, and you discard your hand and draw 3. So, like I said, some of them will make it cost less, some of them will make it cost more. In the end, you are just getting some benefit from paying the Spectacle cost, basically. So Rakdos decks are about creating incidental damage to gain advantage. And you're going to be looking for ways to enable that outside of just regular combat. Next up we have Gruul. So for the Gruul mechanic, we have Riot. Riot is pretty powerful mechanic for limited. Creatures with Riot enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. So this means you can play some on rate creatures that are pretty big, or you can give your creature haste and push through those last points of damage. Two things to note here with Riot. First off, creatures enter the battlefield with your choice. So there is no Riot trigger that your opponents can respond to. So for instance, let's say I cast this Frenzy Erynx here. If I choose to give it a +1/+1 counter, it enters the battlefield as a 4/4. Your opponent cannot skewer the critics in response to the Riot trigger. When you cast a Riot creature, it enters the battlefield with whatever choice you made, and your opponent does not have a chance to respond to it. Another thing to note, that you can have multiple instances of Riot on the same creature. So say you have Rhythm of the Wild, which is an enchantment in Gruul that gives all your creatures Riot. Now you play Frenzied Erynx. Now you get 2 Riot instances of Riot. So you can give it 2 +1/+1 counters. You can give it a +1/+1 counter and haste, or my personal favorite, double haste. Not like it does a lot, but it sends a message. Next up we have Simic. So Simic's mechanic is called Adapt. No surprise here, it has to do with +1/+1 counters. Adapt appears on creatures, allowing you to place a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number following Adapt. So for instance, here we have Adapt 1. So we would place 1 counter on this Aeromunculus after paying 4 mana. Creatures with +1/+1 counters on them already cannot adapt. So if you got a counter on your Adapt creature through different means, you cannot adapt until you remove that counter. The more I thought about Adapt, the more I like it, at least for limited. Basically, I see it as an onboard trick. So on your turn, you move to combat and attack, and you just leave the threat of adapting up, so your opponent can't block, and just takes the damage. And then you use that mana to actually cast something. Or if they do block, then you adapt and eat their creature. And at pre-release, I imagine a lot of people are going to fall into this trap. So I would suggest trying to set it up. People are going to forget about the adapt. They're going to maybe not realize it's instant speed. I would recommend setting those situations up whenever you can, especially at your paper pre-releases. So next thing I wanted to touch on for this format that I think will be really helpful in deck construction as you're narrowing down your last couple cards of filler, is that this format is full of big butts, and they don't lie. Basically, with 56 creatures at common, the average power comes in at 2.57 and the average toughness 2.79. And with 48 uncommon creatures, the average power is 2.6 and the average toughness is 2.875. So these numbers are really close to 3, and it seems like that there will be a lot of 2/3s running around the format with a few 3/3s. And that toughness 4 will be king. So the power and toughness really seem askew here, with more creatures having a higher toughness than a higher power. See this Azorius Knight Arbiter. This guy is a common 2/5. Carrion Imp 2/3. We got a lot of these like this. So basically these numbers mean that I'm more likely to put a creature with toughness 4 in my deck, and make sure that I have some power 3 creatures that can trade on the ground with a 2/3 early. Especially if I'm an aggressive deck. Otherwise, maybe I don't care about trading if I'm not an aggressive deck. But these are things to keep in mind when you're building your deck. And especially the fact that creatures with toughness 2 will probably be getting punished by 2/3s. So next up, we're going to go over the common removal in RNA. So starting with white, we have Summary Judgment. This will kill most things that you want to kill. It's similar to Take Vengeance, but this is an instant, so you can kill a creature before it actually hits you. But sometimes you have to let something swing at you once before you can kill it with the addendum clause. That's not really that big of a deal. I mean, it can suck to take 5, but if you do kill the thing you're trying to kill for only 2 mana, that's a pretty big tempo swing. So just be aware if your opponent is holding up 1 and a white in combat, watch your double blocks, because they may use it to remove one of your creatures and then win the combat. The other common white removal spell is Bring to Trial, and I think this is going to be a must-have at pre-release. I'll be main decking 1, if not 2. In Sealed, you're going to be playing longer games where the bombs really matter more than in Draft, and Bring to Trial will kill most of your opponent's bombs. Not to mention, Exile is nice for all the Afterlife running around. So, like I said, especially in pre-release, I would like Bring to Trial. Maybe it's not as good in Draft, most likely it won't be, but I'm definitely going to be playing at least one of these at my pre-release. Next up, we got Blue. Blue doesn't really have removal, so for Blue, I thought I would just mention the common counter spells. So we have Quench, 1 in a blue, counter target spell, unless it's in controller pays 2. It could often be dead and sealed if you end up in a stalemate with your opponent and they just, both of you have a ton of mana. So I don't think this is too amazing there. There are situations where I can see it be good. I think it's best in a tempo-based deck. We also have Thought Collapse, which is just a bad cancel variant. Basically counter target spell, and then they mill 3 cards. I don't recommend playing this, and I just recommend being aware that it exists. Blue also has Slime Bind, which again is not really a removal, but can function like it, and it will shut down a lot of creatures in the format, at least their attacks. I think it really shines when you have flyers and can just fly over slime-binded creatures. Worth noting, though, it can also be used as a combat trick, so watch out during combat if your opponent's holding up blue, because it may be slime bind. Also, worth noting, Essence Capture. Essence Capture is basically Essence Scatter, except it costs blue instead of 1 in a blue. It is an uncommon, so I just want you guys to be aware of it. This is the other counterspell in the format. And if your opponent's holding up blue, it may be for Essence Capture. Again, it is uncommon, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of it. Or everyone to be aware of it. So next up, for black, we have Consigned to the Pit. Super clunky removal. I don't want to play it if I don't have to. But if you're missing unconditional removal in your deck, you will probably want this, especially in Sealed. But it's much worse than something like Get the Point, another common removal spell in Rakdos. But Grotesque Demise, this is your bread and butter black removal spell for the format. It's going to kill a lot of things that you need to kill, and the Exile clause matters a lot with all these Afterlife creatures. Finally in black is Undercity's Embrace at common. This is another bad removal spell that I'd probably rather have just any 3-drop with power and toughness over this. This being an instant does make it a little bit better, but really not excited and don't think I'll be playing this card very often. For red, we have Scorchmark. It's a little worse than Magnum Spray, but it will get the job done, and again, Exile is useful here. I wouldn't load up on too many of these, since I think there will be a lot of 3 toughness creatures running around. But it's still nice to have one, and you can bring in more if it has a lot of targets. Skewer the Critics is just great. I would often pay 3 mana for 3 damage these days, thinking about like Open Fire. Well, 3 mana for 3 damage anywhere. And then the fact that this is sometimes just a lightning bolt is just amazing. Green has some pretty bad removal in Titanic Brawl. Don't fall into this trap. This is not a good card. It is an instant, which may make you think that it's a good card, but it's not. I'm avoiding this card if possible. Fight spells that don't boost power and toughness, I try to avoid. They are not good. You can engineer situations where it is good, but the effect is honestly just not that great. And especially, I just don't think you need it. Uh, Also in green, we have Sagittarius Volley, which is basically your Plummet variant. But it can also sweep up all the spirit tokens lying around the field, which is pretty nice. It's 3 mana instant, so again, it's nice. It's instant, and it'll do the trick. Probably won't main deck it, but I might. I mean, it depends. I do know that there's a lot of flyers in this format. Nah, I probably wouldn't main deck it, though. In Orzhov, we have Final Payment, which I really like. So white and a black instant. Destroy target creature. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you have to pay 5 life, or sacrifice a creature, or sacrifice an enchantment. So this is really similar to Severed Strands, but much better. First off, being an instant is a huge difference. So for instance, your opponent has a removal spell. They target one of your creatures with a removal spell. Now you can cast Final Payment in response to them targeting your creature and sack it to Final Payment. So now your creature was going to die anyways, so now you got extra use out of it by using it to kill one of their creatures. Besides that modality, you can also pay 5 life or sacrifice an enchantment. So pretty awesome. The first time you might even want to just pay 5 life. Second time, maybe sack a creature. I'm probably going to be playing 2 of these. I might play 3, but I probably wouldn't unless I had like a very dedicated deck that can create a lot of tokens. Rakdos has Get the Point, which is our 5 mana unconditional removal spell with upside for the format. And this one lets you scry 1. This card is great. I'm playing 2 of them if I have them every time. Not much more to say about it. It's just solid removal. We've been fierce picking cards like this if there's nothing else too crazy in the pack. It is gold, which is the only knock that I have against it in draft. But in sealed, this is probably easily splashed and will kill anything. For Azorius, they get Law Mage's Binding, which is an arrest variant that has flash. Who was it? The Men from Moto, I think, called it Flash Pacifism, but it's a little bit better than that because it can't. The creature can't activate abilities. This is just super solid for Azorius. You know, they're going to remove whatever creature that you need to remove, and it having flash and being able to play it at instant speed is huge. Gruul gets a fight spell, and this is the fight spell you should actually be interested in playing. Savage Smash gives your creature +2/+2 until end of turn, then fights. This is such a significant boost. Sometimes you can fight and still attack without losing your creature because you have big old Gruul creatures. It's not instant speed, so keep that in mind, but this is much better than Titanic Smash. Alright, next I want to touch on the common combat tricks you may be running into so that you're more aware of them and can attempt to play around them. So white has the most of them, at common at least, and the first one is Arrester's Zeal. Single white for +2/+2. Pretty great. We have seen effects like this recently that have also given an extra bonus. This one gives the extra bonus if it's cast during the main phase, so we don't really care about that. I'm kind of just ignoring the addendum part. Like, yes, it is useful to be able to close out the game with this if you cast it and give your creature flying, but most of the time this is going to be used to win combats, and being a single mana to give your creature +2/+2 will often lead to you winning combats. So just keep an eye out for it. If your opponent has a single white up, this is what you should be playing around, +2/+2. The other one is Justiciar's Portal, and I don't like this card really at all. So here, let me read it. Exile target creature you control. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It gains first strike until end of turn. So basically you blink your creature and then it gets first strike. So it's very strange. So the situations I see this being good, or well, the situations where I see it being used is one, you're in combat, you use a combat trick against your opponent's blocker, and then they portal their blocker to remove it from combat. So basically you trade combat trick for combat trick then, and then just nothing happens. It's not that great. I can also see it being used to like fizzle combat or fizzle removal spells. And otherwise, I think where it's supposed to be used is like, this is an Azorius card. So like, I think it's used with Dovin's Acuity. Like, that's the purpose of it really. Is that you have Dovin's Acuity on the field and then you cast Portal during your main phase to blink your creature to maybe get an extra bonus from the enter the battlefield effect, or to blink your creature and then... No, you won't. The first strike part of it doesn't even matter because then you can't attack. So, I mean, unless you blink your creature and it's like a haste creature as well, then it can have first strike and attack again. But, yeah, I just don't see this card being very good, and I'm pretty sure you're probably going to be running into it pre-release. People are going to play it, not understand how it really works. Just be aware if they have one to white up, and you're targeting with like a removal spell, they could portal it and fizzle your removal spell. I think that's the best case scenario with it. They could also, like, blink their creature and then block, so like now it has first strike. Again, just not that great. Alright, moving on. Blue has a Rester's Admonition, which is a sweet bounce spell. Just 2 and a blue, return target creature to its owner's hand. We've been playing Crashing Tide in Ixalan, so this is very similar. Just always instant speed. But if you cast it during your main phase, then you draw a card. This is going to be great to break up double blocks and fizzle combat tricks. And otherwise, it'll just draw you a card and replace itself, give you some tempo. So it's going to be super sweet. Black has Blade Brand. Not a particularly good trick, but again, you'll probably run into people playing this. So the way I see this card is like, yes, you do draw a card, so it replaces itself. But I think that you're losing tempo by doing this. So, like, the idea is, like, you attack with your creature, they block, you Blade Brand, it gets Death Touch, and then they probably both trade. Generally, with combat tricks, you want your creature to win combat. So, when you play that combat trick, you're gaining an advantage because your creature still is on the battlefield. When you play Blade Brand, most of the time, your creature is probably not going to still be on the battlefield. Then you did draw a card to replace it, but you also spent mana for that creature. You spent mana on this card, and then you have to draw a card, and then you have to spend mana again to get back onto the board. So, I don't think this is a very good card. It can be used as pseudo removal, but even there, I don't think it's very good. What it does do well is combine with Dagger Caster, which is basically a Goblin Chainwheeler for this format. I think it's a 4-mana 3/3. I can't remember exactly the stat line, but when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature and opponent. So, you play that in combination with Blade Brand, and you built yourself a Wrath. So that's a nice little combo. Dagger Caster is an uncommon, and that's in black and red, so be aware that can happen in the format where black and red can like build this weird Wrath effect. For red, we have Burn Bright. So I would just say watch out if your opponent swings with their team, but it's not lethal. They could have Burn Bright, and you just don't block, and then they play Burn Bright and they kill you, and then you feel really dumb. So watch out for that. I don't think it's a particularly good card in this format. If you are going super wide, then maybe I could see it being useful. But I don't think it's worth putting in your deck most of the time. What I do want to play is Storm Strike. This is premium combat trick right here. Single red mana, +1/+0 and first strike. Oh, and just for fun, you get to scry 1 on top of... Again, single mana for a combat trick, big gain. +1/+0 and first strike will generally make you win a combat. +1 isn't a ton, but first strike usually will set you up to win. And then on top of that, you get to scry 1, just super solid. I will be playing these, and I expect this to be the #1 combat trick that you see played. So if you see your opponent up with 1 red mana, they probably have Storm Strike. Gift of Strength is back in green. Serviceable combat trick. Can help you stop those pesky flyers that green has trouble with. I expect to see this to see play in green decks. Especially like they are going to have problems with all of these flyers, and Gift of Strength doubles as being able to help you stop flyers, but then also help you win combats. So I think I expect to see play. Stony Strength, on the other hand, I'm a little less high on. It does only cost 1 mana again, which is huge, but I don't know. +1/+1 counter. So the way that I see it is +1/+1 is it. That's all it does for you. It untaps your creature too, but we're talking about, say we're in combat. We're already in combat. We've already declared blocks. Stony Strength only gives you +1/+1. No other effects. So oftentimes that may be not enough to win a combat and survive a combat. And especially when you're putting a counter on that creature, you want to win that combat and your creature survive because the counter is permanent. So I don't see that happening very often. Where I do see this is that it's used as a surprise block method. So, and especially in like a very aggressive deck. So it's like 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop. You're just attacking. On turn 4, when I finally maybe start to attack you, you Stony Strength, untap your blocker, untap one of your creatures, give it a +1/+1 counter, block, eat my creature, and then finish me off on the next turn, basically, and attack. That's where I see Stony Strength. I don't think it's very powerful for sealed. Finally, Simic has one of the better combat tricks as well. It's applied Biomancy. So I know I was talking about +1/+1 not being a ton, but the versatility of this card, being able to not only give +1/+1 but also bounce a creature, is huge, and it's not just your opponent's creature. So there's a lot of weird things that you can do with this card, and a lot of situational things that you can do with it. So being able to bounce your creature or your opponent's creature is huge, and then giving your creature +1/+1. You could do this before blocks even are declared. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this card, and I really like it. And it has a lot of play to it. Alright, so now that we've gone over some of the cards you want to be on the lookout for, I want to talk about the top 3 commons in each color. So starting with white, at number 3, we have Civic Stalwart. This is no Angel of the Dawn, but this effect is always useful and limited, and especially in white decks that are making all these 1/1 flying tokens, whether they're spirits or thopters. The Stalwart can really help you finish off the game in your white deck. Next is Syndicate Messenger at number 2. Just a super solid flyer, can hold back a lot of creatures, and when it finally does die, it makes you a 1/1 spirit. So this is going to be a solid staple in most white decks. And finally, number 1, Summary Judgment. Solid common removal, will kill most of what you need to kill, and is going to go in pretty much any white deck. Next, we have blue. For blue at number 3, I have Slimebind. I know. So I had a lot of internal debate about the best blue common. I really like Senate Courier, the 1/4 flyer for 3. Like I mentioned, 4 toughness will survive a lot. Oh, I got the hiccups. I also like Skitter Eel, the 4 mana 3/3 with adapt for 2, or adapt 2 for 3 mana. I really like its play pattern. Basically, it's a 4 mana 3/3. You play it on 4. On turn 5, you attack with holding up adapt, and basically, if you adapt it, it becomes a 5/5, making it very hard for your opponent to block. If they don't block, then you just get through 3 damage, and then get to use that mana to continue to add to your board. So I really like the adapt play patterns. But Skitteriel goes in a Simic deck, Senate Courier goes in an Azorius deck. I found Slimebind can go in pretty much any deck. And it might be important going forward. I think it's especially going to be really good at the beginning of the format and at pre-release, where if you're playing any sort of aggressive deck or even just attacking with your blue deck, your opponents are not going to think about Slimebind when you go and attack and you have 1 to blue up. They're going to be like, blue doesn't have combat tricks. and then you slime them. So I think this is going to be pretty good, at least at the beginning of the format. And we talked about 4 being the magic number. Well, Slime Bind shuts down a creature with 4 power from blocking your 4 toughness creature. Or attacking through your 4 toughness creature, basically. So I think this is going to see play in your average blue deck. Because the other 2 are a little bit more guild specific, like I said. So number 2, we got Arrester's Admonition. Super solid role player for the format, and I'm always going to be playing 1, maybe 2, probably 2, maybe, I don't know. I haven't played with it yet, so we'll see. But at number 1, we got Mr. Freeze, the Chillbringer. 5 mana, 3/3 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, tap target creature and opponent's controls. It doesn't tap during its controller's next untap step. So 5 mana, 3/3 flyer, just base, awesome. This format is full of flyers, and it's going to be really important to be able to stop those flyers. Having 3 toughness will, I guess the really important part is having 3 power, because I see a lot of rares, flying rares with 3 toughness. So Chillbringer can actually fight with a lot of these rare flyers in the air, and they'll trade, which is pretty big, especially when it's also getting the added effect of tapping down a creature for a turn to lock you down and just create this real tempo. I think that in sealed, this is how you could just win games, where you just go Chillbringer, Chillbringer, next turn attack, Chillbringer, next turn attack. That's how you win games right there. Next up, we got Black, and at number 3, I have Dead Revels. So Soul Salvage and Recover have been big parts of Black decks in the last few formats. It's a form of card advantage, and in sealed, you can get Black, or you can get back whatever bombs your opponent's killed. So I like it even better there. Your bombs are so important in sealed, and if you're able to play it and your opponent's able to kill it, then you're in a pretty bad situation. But if you're able to play it and then you're able to make your opponent kill it and then you recur it and play it again, then you're looking really good. Now, especially in this format that has a lot of sacrifice and getting benefits from your creatures dying, Dead Revels is nice because now you can let your creatures die, get some afterlife tokens, get some death triggers, then Revels them back, play them again, get some more triggers, and so on and so forth. So I think this is going to be very solid in all your Black decks pretty much. And then even better, if you're able to pay the Spectacle cost for 1 in a Black, that is huge. You will be able to cast this in the late game, get back 2 creatures, and cast 1 on the same turn. Next, I got Blade Juggler at number 2. So, Blade Juggler as a 5 mana 3/2 is not very impressive. Blade Juggler as a 5 mana 3/2 draw card, that's getting pretty good. Especially in this format where I think it's going to fight a lot of the things that you need to kill. Now, when you cast it for its Spectacle cost, this is dumb. I think 4 mana would be something I'd be willing to pay for this, normally, without the versatility. So this is pretty much always going to be a 2-for-1, I think, in this format, because 3 power means that it will kill or trade with a lot of things that you want to kill or trade, and then when it enters the battlefield, it replaces itself and draws you a card. So I think Blade Juggler is going to be very solid, and being able to cast it for 3 mana is just going to feel dumb sometimes. Especially, it can help to enable these Spectacle chains, where you enable Spectacle, cast Blade Juggler, draw a card, draw another Spectacle card, which then you can cast at an even cheaper cost as well, and it just creates this chain where you just gain these advantages. Number 1 is going to be Grotesque Demise. Obviously, exile target creature with power 3 or less. Not much more to say about it. Play as many as you can get, and it's going to be super solid. Next up is Red. This one was another tough one, but I ended up at Rubblebelt Recluse at number 3. A lot of the red commons were replaceable. They didn't really have that great of effects. and I didn't think that any of them were super powerful, at least in Sealed specifically. I think Rubble Belt Recluse will shine in Sealed. This is a 5-mana 6/5. That's a big boy. He attacks each combat if able, so that might not really be a drawback because in Gruul and Rakdos you're going to want to be attacking. Cast this guy with Rhythm of the Wild on the field, and you just got a 6/5 hasty boy. Like, this guy will do work for you, I feel like. The only thing that makes me worried is like having a decent number of Death Touch creatures in the format. That can suck. But otherwise, I think your opponents are going to have a hard time dealing with this guy. And for only 5 mana for a pretty big body, like, it's going to put pressure on your opponent in some way, and they're going to need to answer it. Next up, for number 2, I have Scorchmark. Again, just solid removal. Exile Claws. Gonna go in pretty much every deck that has red in it, as well as Skewer the Critics. Just another solid red removal spell, and will probably be played in every red deck as well. Lastly, we got green, and at number 3, I have Rampaging Rendhorn. This is a solid on-rate card. You can pay 5 mana for a 5/5. Pretty great. Claw Speed was pretty good in the Amonkhet block. 5/5 is going to show well here in this format. And then not to mention you have the versatility of being able to cast it as a 5 mana 4/4 with haste. And again, 4, magic number, 4 is going to be big enough to survive a lot of things. So sometimes you may even just want to cast it for 4 and then just get in that haste damage. But a lot of times when you're casting it for haste, it means that you're probably just going to win the game. I really like the Rendhorn. It might be replaced by other 5 mana cards that are rares and mythic rares. But otherwise, I think this is just going to be a solid card for your green deck. And number 2, I have Mammoth Spider. So, and again, another 5-drop that is probably... I mean, this is obviously better than Rendhorn, but the main reason is because there's so many dang flyers in this format. It's insane. So you're going to need this Mammoth Spider for your green decks. And on top of that, 5 toughness, huge. 3 power, can kill a lot of the smaller creatures, those 2/3s running around. And then again, just blocks all those flyers. 5 mana. This is going to be a great addition to all your green decks. Lastly, at number 1, we got Sauroform Hybrid. This is a super solid 2-drop. It's going to attack and block in the early game. And then in the late game, if you draw him off the top of your deck, or if he's still alive just on the battlefield, you can adapt him and he becomes a 6/6. And that is going to be a pretty big game. You don't get a lot of 2/2s like this that can be good in the early game, good in the late game. And you honestly just don't get a lot of good 2/2s in this format. So I will be putting Hybrid in all my green decks. Alright, everyone. Well, that brings us to the end of my crash course. I hope you all learned something, and you can take it with you to your pre-release and do well. So be sure to like and subscribe. And for more content from me, you can follow me at A Gang of Hippies on Twitter and Instagram. You can head over to Inked Gaming for any of your custom gaming needs. Say if you need some deck boxes, you need some playmats, you need some sleeves, you can go over there and you can get some custom ones. If you want your cat on your playmat, go to inkedgaming.com. Use text10 at checkout for 10% off. Helps you out, helps us out. You can head on over to mtgdecktext.com, where there's going to be tons more Magic content. You can get everything from Commander, Modern, Limited, Standard, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of great writers over there. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I just hope that everyone has a great weekend, lots of fun, and crushes their events. I'll talk to you guys later, and thanks again.